Tonight, the Middle Eastern strategic landscape did not merely shift. It detonated. Iran has just received 400 DF-5B intercontinental ballistic missiles from the People's Republic of China in what represents the single largest nuclear-capable delivery system transfer in the history of modern warfare. Not 4 dozen, not 40. 400 operational DF-5B systems with complete logistical support packages, trained launch crews, and full technical data transfer protocols. This is a number that exceeds Israel's entire population center infrastructure by a factor of 20. A number that renders every city, every military installation, every critical infrastructure node across Israeli territory simultaneously targetable with zero possibility of comprehensive defensive response. A number 30 times beyond any rational deterrence threshold and 10 times beyond Israel's total Iron Dome intercept capacity, even if every battery operated at theoretical maximum efficiency for sustained operations. The transfer has been confirmed beyond any reasonable analytical doubt through multiple independent verification streams. Satellite imagery over the past 72 hours has captured the systematic offloading operations at Bandar Abbas port facility, with distinct DF-5B transporter erector launcher configurations visible across 16 separate berths. Signals intelligence has intercepted launch crew training communications referencing specific technical parameters unique to DF-5B operational doctrine. Human intelligence networks have reported the arrival of Chinese technical personnel associated with 2nd Artillery Corps Strategic Systems Divisions. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is verified strategic reality that every major intelligence service on the planet is currently processing in emergency assessment cycles. The Pentagon's response has been paralysis wrapped in bureaucratic deflection. No military options are being prepared. No deployment orders are being issued. No carrier strike groups are receiving movement instructions. The United States Department of Defense has effectively refused to act, leaving Israel to confront an existential threat of unprecedented magnitude with precisely zero American military backing beyond hollow diplomatic statements about regional stability and commitment to defensive partnerships. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this catastrophic strategic transfer. The technical specifications that make the DF-5B the most devastating weapon system ever deployed to the Middle Eastern theater. The operational implications that have rendered Israeli defensive architecture completely obsolete. The strategic calculations that have left American planners with zero viable response options. The global consequences that signal the permanent end of Western hegemonic control over Middle Eastern security architecture. And the civilizational implications of a world where Tehran commands nuclear delivery capabilities that dwarf those of established nuclear powers. The DF-5B intercontinental ballistic missile represents Chinese strategic weapons engineering at its most mature and battle-proven developmental stage. Designated as Dongfeng 5B under People's Liberation Army Rocket Force nomenclature, this system entered operational service in 1981 and has undergone 6 major modernization cycles, each dramatically enhancing payload capacity, accuracy, and penetration characteristics. The current operational variant features a throw weight of 3,000 kilograms, sufficient to deliver either a single 5-megaton thermonuclear warhead or a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle package containing up to 6 individual warheads of 350 kilotons each. The strategic purpose of the DF-5B within Chinese nuclear doctrine has been assured second strike capability against hardened American command bunkers and strategic facilities. The system was specifically designed to survive a first strike through mobile deployment, deliver overwhelming counterforce against protected targets, and penetrate advanced ballistic missile defense systems through sheer payload mass and terminal velocity characteristics. Maximum operational range extends to 13,000 kilometers, placing every Israeli population center well within engagement parameters from launch sites anywhere in Iranian territory. Terminal phase velocity reaches Mach 23, generating intercept geometry challenges that exceed the design specifications of every operational missile defense system currently deployed. But raw specifications tell only a fraction of the strategic story. What transforms this transfer from significant to absolutely catastrophic is the employment doctrine that accompanies the hardware. The 400 DF-5B systems have not been delivered as individual isolated units requiring years of indigenous training and integration. They arrive as complete strike packages with Chinese 2nd Artillery Corps technical advisors embedded for the first 18 months of operational deployment. Launch crews have completed accelerated training programs at facilities in Western China, running live fire exercises against simulated defensive networks modeled explicitly on Israeli integrated air defense architecture. Communications protocols, targeting algorithms, launch sequencing doctrine, and coordinated salvo employment strategies have all been transferred as comprehensive operational packages. The intercept mathematics are absolutely devastating for Israeli defensive planners. Iron Dome was designed and optimized for short-range rocket threats with flight times measured in seconds and terminal velocities under Mach 5. The system maintains intercept success rates above 85% against Qassam rockets and comparable threats, creating the defensive umbrella that has protected Israeli population centers for over a decade. Against DF-5B reentry vehicles descending at Mach 23 following ballistic trajectories from launch points 1,500 kilometers distant, Iron Dome intercept probability degrades to functionally zero. The radar systems cannot achieve tracking lock at sufficient range to generate firing solutions. The interceptor missiles lack the velocity to reach intercept geometry before warhead impact. The battle management systems cannot process targeting data fast enough to coordinate responses across the engagement timeline. David's sling represents Israel's mid-tier defensive layer, specifically designed to address the gap between Iron Dome's short-range focus and Arrow's high-altitude intercept mission. The system employs stunner interceptors with sophisticated dual-mode seekers and hit-to-kill kinetic warheads optimized against maneuvering cruise missiles and medium-range ballistic threats. Maximum intercept altitude reaches 30 kilometers, with engagement ranges extending to 300 kilometers against cooperative targets. Against DF-5B systems executing standard ballistic profiles with terminal velocities exceeding Mach 20, David's sling faces the identical intercept geometry failures that cripple Iron Dome effectiveness. The interceptors simply cannot reach the necessary altitudes with sufficient velocity to achieve kinetic kills against targets moving at hypersonic speeds through the terminal phase. Arrow 3 constitutes Israel's exoatmospheric defense layer, representing the most advanced intercept technology in the Israeli defensive arsenal. The system operates above the atmosphere, engaging targets in the mid-course phase of ballistic flight where aerodynamic forces are absent and intercept geometry is theoretically more favorable. Arrow 3 has demonstrated successful intercepts against simulated ICBM-class threats in controlled test environments, achieving kinetic kills at altitudes exceeding 100 kilometers. But test environment success against single targets with known launch points and predicted trajectories bears zero relationship to operational effectiveness against massive coordinated salvos from multiple azimuths with deliberate saturation tactics. The cost exchange mathematics reveal strategic impossibility. Each Arrow 3 interceptor costs approximately $2.3 million. Each DF-5B missile costs approximately $800,000 in Chinese production economics. Iran can afford to expend 5 DF-5B systems for every Arrow 3 interceptor in Israeli inventory and still maintain overwhelming numerical advantage. Israeli defensive stockpiles contain approximately 30 operational Arrow 3 interceptors with production capacity to generate perhaps 6 additional units per month under emergency surge conditions. Against 400 DF-5B systems, the defensive mathematics are not challenging. They are impossible. Israeli defensive doctrine has relied for decades on multi-layered architecture, creating redundant intercept opportunities across short, medium, and long-range defensive zones. But layered defense provides redundancy only when each layer maintains some probability of successful intercept. When all 3 primary defensive systems face identical intercept geometry failures against a specific threat class, layering provides zero additional protection. The architecture becomes irrelevant when the threat operates in velocity and altitude regimes that exceed every layer's engagement envelope simultaneously. The scenario modeling conducted by Western strategic analysis centers reveals outcomes that Israeli leadership finds politically impossible to acknowledge publicly. A coordinated strike employing just 20% of the transferred DF-5B inventory, 80 missiles distributed across Israeli strategic targets, would overwhelm defensive systems within the first salvo. Iron Dome batteries would cycle through intercept attempts against targets moving too fast to track effectively. David's sling systems would launch interceptors unable to reach necessary intercept geometries. Arrow 3 batteries would fire their limited magazines at incoming salvos, exceeding their discrimination and engagement capacity by factors of 10. Population centers across Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, Beersheba would face simultaneous targeting with zero realistic defensive options. Critical infrastructure nodes including Dimona Nuclear Facility, Nevatim and Ramon air bases, Haifa Port Complex would receive dedicated targeting with multiple warheads allocated to ensure destruction through defensive penetration. Command and control networks linking military headquarters, communication facilities, and early warning systems would face decapitation strikes timed to arrive ahead of main salvo impacts, blinding defensive coordination before primary strikes arrive. The casualty projections circulating through classified military channels describe scenarios that Israeli society has never confronted in its entire national existence. Even with civil defense protocols fully activated, underground shelter networks utilized at maximum capacity, and emergency response systems operating at peak efficiency, the strike scenarios generate casualty estimates ranging from hundreds of thousands to low millions depending on warhead yields employed and target selection priorities. These are not worst-case theoretical scenarios. These are median probability outcomes based on standard strike planning doctrine against a nation whose geographic concentration creates inherent vulnerability to strategic bombardment. What does Jerusalem do when its entire defensive architecture has been rendered obsolete overnight? What military options exist for a nation whose survival has depended on qualitative military superiority when that superiority has been categorically negated by quantitative threat multiplication beyond any possible defensive response? How does a society of 9 million maintain cohesion when facing potential annihilation from weapon systems that cannot be intercepted, cannot be preempted without triggering immediate massive retaliation, and cannot be deterred through conventional military superiority? If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. The operational consequences extend far beyond the immediate Israeli strategic dilemma. American force posture across the Middle Eastern theater faces comprehensive reassessment under threat conditions that Pentagon planners categorically did not anticipate when current deployment patterns were established. The United States maintains significant military presence across the region through permanent basing agreements, rotational force deployments, and pre-positioned equipment stocks designed to enable rapid crisis response. Every single installation, every forward deployed unit, every logistics hub now operates under the shadow of Iranian strategic strike capabilities that American defensive systems cannot reliably counter. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar houses over 10,000 American military personnel and serves as forward headquarters for United States Central Command air operations. The facility operates as the critical logistical node enabling American air power projection across the entire Middle Eastern theater, with command and control systems linking operations from Afghanistan to Syria. Under previous strategic conditions, Al Udeid represented untouchable American power, protected by distance from Iranian territory, and by implicit understanding that striking American forces would trigger overwhelming retaliation. The DF-5B transfer has obliterated both protective factors. The base sits well within DF-5B range from Iranian territory. An Iranian possession of 400 nuclear-capable ICBMs creates strategic uncertainty about American willingness to risk escalation to nuclear exchange over Middle Eastern installations. Naval Support Activity Bahrain serves as headquarters for United States Fifth Fleet, maintaining operational control over naval forces throughout the Persian Gulf, Red Sea, and Arabian Sea. The facility hosts approximately 9,000 American personnel with extensive port infrastructure supporting carrier strike group operations and mine countermeasure capabilities. The strategic calculation underlying Fifth Fleet forward basing has been that American naval presence deters Iranian aggression through demonstration of overwhelming conventional superiority and rapid strike capability. That calculation disintegrates when Tehran possesses the capacity to eliminate the entire facility with a single DF-5B strike, while American defensive systems provide zero reliable protection. American carrier strike groups operating in regional waters face tactical dilemmas without historical precedent. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, currently deployed in the Arabian Sea, represents over 7,000 personnel and approximately $30 billion in capital assets concentrated in a mobile but ultimately targetable platform. Carrier doctrine relies on mobility, defensive systems, and overwhelming offensive capability to ensure survivability in contested environments. Against conventional anti-ship missiles, these factors provide adequate protection through layered defense and evasive maneuvering. Against DF-5B systems retargeted for maritime strike missions, carrier defensive systems become effectively irrelevant. The broader question consuming Pentagon strategic planning cells is whether any conventional military response to Iranian actions remains viable when Tehran possesses nuclear delivery capabilities that American forces cannot defend against. Every contingency plan for striking Iranian nuclear facilities, every operational concept for degrading IRGC capabilities, every scenario for supporting Israeli operations assumes American forces can operate without facing strategic-level retaliation that American defensive architecture cannot counter. That assumption has been permanently invalidated. The cost of American military paralysis extends beyond immediate operational constraints to fundamental questions about alliance credibility and hegemonic sustainability. Israeli leadership faces a strategic reality where American security guarantees have been revealed as operationally meaningless. Decades of Israeli strategic planning have been predicated on the assumption that existential threats would trigger American intervention, providing capabilities that Israel alone cannot generate. What happens to that planning framework when the existential threat arrives and American intervention consists of diplomatic statements and intelligence sharing rather than military action? Gulf Arab states observing American paralysis are conducting their own strategic reassessments with profound implications for regional security architecture. The basic bargain underlying Gulf security relationships with Washington has been that these nations accept American military presence, support American strategic objectives, and align foreign policies with American preferences in exchange for security guarantees against regional threats. When those security guarantees prove hollow in the face of Iranian capability, the strategic logic underlying Gulf alignment with Washington collapses. Saudi Arabia has already initiated quiet diplomatic engagement with Tehran, seeking accommodation arrangements that acknowledge new strategic realities. The United Arab Emirates has accelerated economic integration initiatives with Iran, calculating that commercial interdependence provides better security than American military partnerships that fail to deliver protection when needed. Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar are all recalibrating their strategic positioning, moving away from exclusive American alignment toward hedging strategies that maintain relationships with all major regional powers. The erosion of American alliance structures creates strategic momentum that extends far beyond the Middle Eastern theater. Every nation that has predicated security planning on American extended deterrence guarantees is now reassessing whether those guarantees retain credibility when Washington proves unwilling or unable to counter major power military transfers that fundamentally alter regional balances. Japan watches American paralysis in the Middle East and questions whether American security commitments would prove more reliable in East Asian contingencies. South Korea observes American failure to prevent massive weapons transfers to Iran and wonders whether similar transfers to North Korea would trigger more decisive American responses. NATO allies in Eastern Europe note American unwillingness to confront Chinese strategic weapons proliferation and reassess assumptions about American willingness to risk nuclear confrontation over Baltic security. The global strategic order emerging from this crisis reflects fundamental transitions in power distribution, technological capability, and willingness to challenge American preferences. The unipolar moment that followed Soviet collapse was predicated on American conventional military superiority, so overwhelming that potential adversaries had no viable options for challenging American actions in regions Washington deemed vital to its interests. That superiority has been systematically eroded through patient adversary development of asymmetric capabilities that negate American conventional advantages while introducing escalation risks that American political leadership proves unwilling to accept. Russia has demonstrated in Ukraine that large-scale conventional warfare remains viable despite American technological advantages when adversaries possess sufficient mass, strategic depth, and willingness to absorb costs. China has demonstrated in the Western Pacific that access denial capabilities can render American power projection problematic in regions where geography favors defense and where American bases operate within reach of massive Chinese missile inventories. Iran has now demonstrated in the Middle East that strategic weapons proliferation can neutralize American conventional superiority by introducing nuclear escalation risks that paralyze American decision-making. The common thread connecting these demonstrations is that American hegemonic power has become a hollow shell maintained more through historical inertia and institutional momentum than through actual capability to impose American preferences on resistant major powers. The arsenal of American military power remains formidable in absolute terms, But the willingness to employ that power has been progressively constrained by adversary actions that systematically raise the potential costs of American intervention beyond levels that American political leadership will accept. This strategic reality marks not merely a temporary setback for American Middle Eastern policy, but rather a permanent inflection point in the trajectory of global order. The architecture of international relations is fundamentally restructuring away from American-centered unipolarity toward genuine multipolarity, where multiple power centers possess both capability and will to resist American preferences in their regions of core interest. Iran, commanding 400 nuclear-capable ICBMs, represents not an aberration, but rather the natural evolution of this transition, as middle powers that were previously constrained by American military dominance acquire capabilities that neutralize that dominance and enable genuine strategic autonomy. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. The civilizational implications extend beyond strategic balance sheets and force posture calculations to fundamental questions about sovereignty, resistance, and the distribution of power in the emerging international order. What has occurred over the past 72 hours is not merely a weapons transfer, but rather a concrete demonstration that sustained resistance to hegemonic pressure can succeed, that self-reliance is achievable even for nations operating under comprehensive sanctions regimes, and that patience and strategic planning can overcome seemingly insurmountable conventional military disadvantages. Iran represents a civilization that has been under continuous external pressure for generations, facing sanctions designed to cripple its economy, sabotage operations targeting its technical infrastructure, assassination campaigns eliminating its scientific leadership, and constant military threats from powers possessing overwhelming conventional superiority. Every Western strategic assumption has been that this pressure would eventually force capitulation, regime collapse, or at minimum behavioral modification toward Western preferences. The DF-5B transfer demonstrates the comprehensive failure of that strategic theory. Rather than capitulating under pressure, Iran has systematically developed indigenous capabilities, cultivated strategic partnerships with major powers willing to challenge American hegemony, and pursued patient long-term planning that has now achieved strategic breakthrough. The lesson for every nation in the global south observing this trajectory is that resistance to hegemonic pressure is viable, that self-reliance is achievable, and that the apparently overwhelming power of Western military dominance can be neutralized through strategic patience and willingness to accept costs during the development phase. The world will never be the same after tonight. The strategic assumptions that have governed Middle Eastern security architecture for decades have been permanently invalidated. The illusion of Israeli invulnerability has been shattered beyond any possibility of restoration through incremental defensive improvements. The credibility of American security guarantees has been exposed as hollow when tested against adversaries willing to accept escalation risks. The trajectory of global power distribution has been irreversibly confirmed as moving away from unipolar American dominance toward multipolar competition where regional powers command genuine strategic autonomy. History will mark this moment as the night when the old order's decay became undeniable and the new order's emergence became irreversible. Tehran commanding 400 DF-5B nuclear-capable ICBMs while Washington refuses to act represents not merely a crisis requiring management, but rather a turning point demanding recognition that the fundamental architecture of global power has been permanently transformed. Your engagement with this analysis keeps this work independent and sharp. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand what is actually at stake. Has this transfer permanently shattered Israeli security doctrine, or will Jerusalem find responses that current analysis cannot anticipate? Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter.